Hello students, today we are going to learn Unit 5, 6 and 7. Explore social differences, access to resources, the Mahabharata and how text and society evolved over time. Now, Unit 5. Explaining social differences, a social contract, under which we are going to study alternative Buddhist view on equality. Buddhists offered a different interpretation of social inequalities. They also explained how institutions were created to manage social conflict. This explanation appears in a myth in the Sutta Pitaka. What is the Sutta Pitaka? A Buddhist sacred text collection. Moving on to early ideal state of humanity. According to the myth, humans did not have fully developed bodily forms, meaning the physical structure. Plants were also not fully developed. All beings lived in an idyllic state, that means perfect, peaceful conditions. People took only what was necessary from nature for their meals. This shows a society based on simplicity and lack of greed and harmony. Moving on to moral decline of human behavior. Gradually, the situation worsened due to human behavior. People became greedy, vindictive, deceitful. This caused conflict and disorder in society. It represents the deterioration of social harmony. Creation of kingship by social agreement. People decided to choose someone to maintain order. The chosen person would be wrathful when injustice occurred, censure wrongdoing, banish offenders. That means he has to show his anger when any injustice occurred. He has to punish when someone is doing wrong, and he has to send away the people who are making mistakes, that is send away from the village. So in return, people would give him a share of rice as a payment. He was also called Mahasamatta, that is the great chosen one. Okay, moving on to the next one, concept of social contract. This story, Struggle's kingship, was based on human choice, not divine origin. Taxes were seen as payment for services rendered by the king. This is similar to the idea of a social contract. Authority came from public concern. Human agency and social systems. The story shows belief in human agency. Humans created social and economic institutions themselves. Therefore, systems are not fixed forever. They can be changed by humans in future. Now, moving on to the next unit, handling text, historians and the Mahabharata. Now, how historians analyze text? It was little complicated, but let us study step by step. Historians examine several elements before using text as sources. They check the language used. Prakrit, Pali, Tamil. Languages were used by the ordinary people. Sanskrit, these were the language mainly for priests and elites. They identified the type of text, that is mantra, sacred chant used in rituals, stories, narrative that people heard and retold. They studied the author's perspective. They identified the intended audience, since authors write keeping their interest in mind. They try to ascertain, that is, date of composition, place of composition. Only after all these steps do historians interpret the historical significance. This process is difficult for the Mahabharata due to its complexity. Now, let's move on to 6.1, language and content. Language of the Mahabharata. The version studied is in Sanskrit, though other language versions exist. Its Sanskrit is simpler than that of the Vedas or Prashastis. What is Prashastis? Royal praise inscriptions. Therefore, it was probably widely understood by many people. Classification of content. Historians divide the text into two types: narrative sections, didactic sections. When we speak about narrative sections, it was narrative, that means story based content, contains dramatic stories and events. Now, when we talk about didactic sections, they were didactic. What do you mean by that? That is to teach moral or social rules. It contains instructions about social norms. So this division is not watertight, that is not strictly separate. So stories appear in didactic parts. Social messages appear in narrative. So historians believe main aim was that the dramatic storytelling. Didactic portions were likely added later. Now, Mahabharata as Itihasa. It was described as Itihasa in Sanskrit tradition. Literal meaning, thus it was, like say, interpreted as history. So debate exists about the war. Some historians think it reflects memory of a real conflict. Others find no corroborative evidence. That means there was no supporting proof. Now, moving on to the next one. 6.2 Authors and Dates. Early composition. Original story composed by Sutas. Sutas, the charioteer Butts. That means poet singers accompanying warriors. They were only called as Butts. They composed poems praising victories. Stories circulated orally. The next one, Brahmanical writing phase. From 5th century BCE, Brahmanas wrote it down, occurred when chiefdoms like Kurus and Panchalas became kings. Possible reasons could be king wanted systematic preservation, social upheavals, that is, there could be social disturbances or social changes reflected in the text. Later additions. 200 BCE to 200 CE, worship of Vishnu increased. Krishna identified with Vishnu. From 200 to 400 CE, large didactic sections added, similar to Manusmriti teachings. Text grew from 10,000 verses to 1 lakh verses, traditionally attributed to sage Vyasa. Now, moving on to the 6.3, search for convergence. Archaeological evidence. Epic describes battles, palaces, forests. Archaeologist B.B. Lal excavated Hastinapura, possible link with epic city. Location matched with Kuru region, but similarity may be coincidental. Now, moving on to findings from excavation, second phase houses, mud and mud brick walls, reed walls plastered with mud. When I say reed, what is that? Plant stock used for construction. Now, third phase house, mud brick and burnt brick. Drainage system was formed. Soakage jars absorb wastewater. That is the meaning of soakage jars. Brick drains were found. Terracotta ring wells. That is, it can be wells or drain pits. Now, interpretation issues. Epic city descriptions may have been added later or would be poetic fantasy or say fancy, that is imaginative descriptions that show some difficulty verifying literature through archaeology. Now, Draupadi's polyandry episode. What do you mean by polyandry? One woman married to multiple husbands. So central to narrative. Authors gave multiple explanations. Historians' interpretations might reflect practice among ruling elites. Later, Brahmanical discomfort led to reinterpretations. So, what are the other theories that we find? That is common in Himalayan regions, results of demographic crisis. So, what is the important insight? Literature follows narrative needs, does not always reflect real social practices. Now, moving on to Unit 7, a dynamic text. So, when I say dynamic, that is changing continuously. Continuous growth of the Mahabharata. The development of the Mahabharata did not end with the Sanskrit version. Over centuries, the epic continued to expand and change. This shows the text was dynamic and not fixed. Translation into many languages. The epic was rewritten in various regional languages. This happened through dialogue between peoples, communities, authors. Each society adapted the story to its own cultural context. Now, inclusions of regional stories. Stories that originated in specific regions were incorporated into the epic. Tales circulating among certain groups were added over time. This made the epic richer and more diverse. Retelling of the central narrative. The main story of the Mahabharata was retold in different ways. Interpretations changed according to social context, cultural values, audience expectations. This shows flexibility in storytelling traditions. Now, representation in art and performance. Episodes were shown through sculptures, paintings. Stories became themes for narrations, performances. This demonstrates the epic's culture or say epic's cultural influence beyond written text. These units, like Unit 5, 6, and 7, show how society and text changed over time, reflecting human choices, social norms, and culture. And we come to the end of this lesson. And so I've given you again 8 marks board based questions. Please practice and mm, revise and then practice. I will see you in the next lesson of History NCERT syllabus. Thank you.